Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Just simple yes will do. Perfect. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome back. It's a second Vue edition. It's a fourth From That Love Meetup. It's a really exciting edition because we have something to announce for tonight. The official Vue.js Amsterdam 2020 movie is out. And we would like to broadcast it for you for the first time. So I hope you enjoy it.
This event is pretty much the hub for all the Vue.js community in the EU. I thought this conference was huge, and now it's getting even bigger, so I'm really impressed. I think it's great to have it as a recurring event where Vue.js developers and users in the EU can sort of have this annual gathering. And it's also good for me too, because it gives me this exposure to the users in EU. And yeah, for this, I'm actually really grateful for passionate people for keep hosting this.
Feeling good? Yeah.
The good stuff keeps coming and coming and coming. Great talks, great content. I cannot say anything wrong. It's always exciting to be here.
Woo! Hope you enjoyed it. We were really excited about that one. So we just wanted to share with you. Maybe some people already saw it because I actually uploaded it last week. But let's continue with tonight. I would like to introduce my colleague, Ben.
Hello.
I'm going to present tonight. He was also the MC during From That Love. Please, Ben, take it away and enjoy tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Jos. By the way, guys, I'm used to murdering people's names, and I just wanted to set something straight because I've been watching other online meetups. Usually when people say Jos' name, they say Jos, and it's actually Jos, just so you guys know. Anyways, before I murder other people's names, I'm Ben, just to let you guys know. I work for passionate people as a software developer, and I had the opportunity to be the MC in this last conference that you guys just saw the video for. And today I get to present our speakers as well. We have 3 very special speakers today. Oh, by the way, after each of those talks, you guys are going to have a chance to also ask some questions, and hopefully we can have a nice discussion. So on to the 3 speakers that we'll have today. The very first one is Filip Rakowski. I hope I'm not saying his last name wrong. He is one of the co-founders of Vue Storefront and also an architect there. He's going to talk to us about Composition API and hopefully show us some examples as well of how that works in combination with the Vue Storefront. And then following him, we're going to have Natalia Tepluhina. Hopefully I'm not murdering her name. And then Callum, Macrae. But we'll talk more about them when their time comes. So without making you guys feel any more bored than you already are, let's go on to the first speaker. Welcome, Filip, and the time is yours. I don't know if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay, yes, I'm sharing it right now.
There you go. And now I'm going to hide myself.
Okay, so hello, everyone. Yeah, do you hear me?
There you go.
Cool. Yeah, like traditional questions when you're streaming something. Okay, guys, so hello. My name is Filip Rakowski. And let me introduce myself first. I will be talking about actually how we used Vue.js features and how we use Composition API in Vue Storefront. And currently we are actually production ready. So I think we're one of the first ever projects that embraced Composition API in production. So it's also a pretty nice, I'd say, pretty nice case study. So yes, I'm Filip Rakowski. I'm a co-founder of Vue Storefront, and I'm also becoming a CTO of it soon. I'm also blogging on Vue School, mostly about Vue-free and performance. So if you're interested in that topics, please don't hesitate to check it. And I'm also a community partner of Vue.js. So okay, that was meant to be call to action, but I just realized that you can't actually answer me. So I work as a company that is doing only e-commerce. So no other development, only e-commerce shops, shop after shop. And after a few years of doing this, I noticed one thing. Whenever you're working with any of these platforms, all of them have one special things in common regarding its front-end development experience. It sucks. Really, like, woof. I think those guys are just not taking into account front-end developers in many cases. Everything is really overcomplicated. You rarely have a chance to work with anything newer than jQuery. Seriously, if you have jQuery, you're lucky. And the code is often like kind of a mix of HTML, JavaScript, and PHP, and many other monsters. And the closest we can get to modern front-end technologies, to be honest, is by reading about them on Twitter. So it's a really bad experience, unless you go headless. And by saying headless, I actually don't mean that you should kill yourself because your job is so frustrating. I mean that your application should become headless and embrace the headless APIs. So what does it mean? Actually, it's pretty simple concept. If you are already working with modern front-end technologies, and I assume you do, you're probably already doing this. So headless applications are front-end applications that are getting the data via APIs, in opposite to old way of doing things when we're rendering everything on a server and fueling the data on a server as a static static assets. And it gives you flexibility of using modern front-end stack and combining different third-party services within this application. So, for example, if you don't like the way how WordPress is managing content in your app, you can just use Storyblock API to get it. If you don't like Storyblock, you can use anything else. So it's very flexible. Also, headless applications are usually much faster than traditional server-side renderless application, because you can use all modern front-end performance techniques and tools. One is to achieve better results. So at Divante, company I work for, we started doing headless shops some time ago. And very quick, we came to the conclusion that a lot of our job is very repetitive. So every shop is similar, and if every shop contains, product page, category page, cart, checkout, stuff like that, what's the point of writing all of that from scratch? So we decided that we need to make something we can reuse in new projects to speed them up. And we also decided that we will make it open source because it would be beneficial for the project, it will be beneficial for the community, and it will be much faster to build it because people will contribute, people will validate our ideas. Generally, publishing things as open source is a really good idea. If you have this possibility, just do this. So we started around 2.5 years ago. It was me and my boss coding after hours, like few hours after hours, and people and agencies were joining us. New shops were started popping out, and suddenly we came to this point when we became an industry standard. So right now we have more than 70 agencies working with Vue Storefront. We have more than 100 live shops. I just checked it like a few days ago. It was 113 or something like that. We had hackathons in all places around the world, around Europe and USA. Actually, 2 of them were in the USA, but it still counts. And during this talk, I want to share with you how we got there, but from the technical perspective. So how the product evolved and how Vue.js can be used to build really good APIs, and how composition APIs can be used to build even better APIs. So we started as a very innocent boilerplate, but we had really nice feature that made us stand out from any other boilerplate. This feature was called backend agnosticity. So what does it mean? It means that the same code worked for every backend platform that VueStorefront, that API VueStorefront was using. So even if you decided to change the backend platform, for example, let's say from WooCommerce to PrestaShop, you didn't need to change any code on the frontend layer, because the API for the frontend layer was always the same. This is more or less how it looks like. It may look complicated, but actually one thing that matters here is to understand this agnostic concept. So it's called data pump on the left side. And the responsibility of data pump was to pump the data from a given e-commerce platform to our Elasticsearch, which is a database, and change its data formats to the one accepted by VueStorefront. So no matter from which platform we are pumping the data, it ends up with the same data format. So if we will change this Magento, for example, with WooCommerce, the data formats will remain the same. Therefore, we don't need to make any changes on frontend layer. Pretty cool. So VueStorefront was gaining a lot of popularity, and we're constantly adding new features to our boilerplate because people like that and we like that. And at some point, we came to the point where we needed to find a way to ship new features to currently existing shops, because people started using it and it was, let's say, very basic. And we solved it pretty easy. We actually divided the project layer and the core layer, and it looked more or less like that. So the project layer was a team, and the core layer was something that was delivered by us and something that users shouldn't touch, and because that part was updatable. And we're exposing core functionalities to the team through mixing, stores, filters, and directives. And the team was, just a Vue.js project that was using this core. Also, mixings were a perfect way of encapsulating e-commerce functionalities, and that was our main API, I'd say. And for example, in the core, we could have a cart component like this, and it's nothing unusual, just some Vuex interaction. But if you would keep it in a core and just have it, if we wouldn't keep in a core and just have it in a team, like a normal code that user can modify, once we make some changes to these Vuex actions, then that would be a breaking change. So to avoid that, we just shipped all component functionalities as mixings, which were kind of like an abstraction layer over that. So in the team, you could just mix business logic in and write your own templates and styles. And if we will make some changes, they will be automatically updated, because this API, this low-level API with Vuex, is hidden. So just like this, that was all you needed to write to have a shopping cart component in VueStorefront. You didn't need to worry about business logic at all. You had just some properties that were exposed to you, and you were able to put them into UI. So once we solved that issue, another one came in. VueStorefront was full of features because we were adding them constantly, but not every customer needed that features, and some customers needed different features. And it's pretty hard to build a Swiss knife as a single page application, because everyone has different needs. So we actually needed a way to add or remove certain features in a very simple way, so people can pick only the ones that they need. And the solution that we came up with was called modules. And if it sounds similar to Angular to you, it's not exactly that, but it was kind of inspired. So what was the module? Every module contained mixings, Vuex stores, route required for a given feature to work. So for example, if we had a checkout module, the checkout module contains checkout page, the checkout module contained checkout mixings, and probably checkout state. And What was great about modules is the fact that there was only one place where you're registering all of them. So this is a module from the inside. It looked like this. So it had access to app instance, it had access to our store, it had access to our router, it also had its external config. And we were just hooking into that. And how we were registering this module? Well, just like this. So it's very simple, and it's very similar to actually Vue.js plugin. It was also an inspiration for the registration API. So at some point, modules became our public API, and also became our extension API. So not only we were shipping modules, but also our community was shipping modules. And even though at that time all these solutions seemed to be pretty awesome, and I still think they're pretty awesome, we're designing all of them in a big rush. And at some point, we started noticing the weaknesses of this approach. So we had very wide public API surface, as I showed you with mixins. We had tons of mixins, and all of them had its methods, had its data properties. So it's a huge API to maintain. And you really don't want to end up in a situation like that, because it's really hard to avoid breaking changes when you're building software. On your API layer, it's very wide. Also, the problem with mixins was that they're not telling you anything about what they're mixing in, which is a very bad user experience, because you could have some name collisions, and also people can't simply take that mixin and immediately know what this mixin is doing for them. And at this point, it was really hard to be backward compatible, because we are shipping a lot of breaking changes. Also, another problem was the fact that we needed to maintain our own server-side rendering, our own module system, and documentation for all of that. That was just a little bit too much of code for us to maintain, even though it wasn't e-commerce logic per se. So we shouldn't take care of that. So we realized that fixing those problems would require breaking most of our APIs. So it could be either one big update that is impossible to apply because there are so many breaking changes, or a year of constant minor annoying updates, which is also not the best scenario. So we decided that, okay, that wouldn't be an update, that would be rather a migration. And we decided that we need to start from scratch. So after building something for 2 years, you know exactly how certain problems should be solved and what to be cautious about when designing the new APIs. And those were more or less the high-level goals we wanted to achieve. So we actually wanted to reduce the amount of code maintained by us, the amount of code maintained by users. We also wanted to have much smaller API layer, and we wanted this API layer to not be tied to implementation details, so we can freely ship updates and make internal changes without breaking the public APIs. And we also wanted to speed up the development, which is connected to learning curve, which is again connected to having too big API or smaller API. So we called all these new efforts in making new VueStorefront Next. And you know, this name is pretty obvious. I think most of the new projects are called something next, Vue Next, for example. Personally, I wanted to call it Capybara, but they didn't let me. Fortunately, after some time, I made my point, and we have a new team for VueStorefront that is called Capybara. So we wanted to put developers first and provide a really good developer experience, because VueStorefront at that time had a really good API when you compare it to any e-commerce platform, but it wasn't outstanding API when you compare it to Vue.js applications and basically front-end application. So it was an upgrade for developers, but it wasn't something that was, you know, comparable to modern front-end technology developer experience. So our first assumption was that having this middleware adds actually a lot of complexity to hosting and deployment and actually setting project up, so we should get rid of that. For the API, our initial idea was to replace mixins with slots. They're not perfect, but they have many advantages over mixins. For example, at least they are giving you information about what they have access to. But the problem with scope slots is that you have access to this data only in the template. And you can't really configure, for example, the component, override some methods, some internal methods and stuff like that. Of course, you can create some kind of a scope slot factory, component factory that holds the scope slots, that outputs different components with scope slots based on the parameters. But if you find yourself over engineering like that, you're probably going too far, and this is probably not the best approach. So we're about to accept the drawbacks of scope slots, and then I saw the news about Composition API plugin, and that was literally my face, because suddenly, magically, when I was trying to figure out how to overcome drawbacks of scope slots, suddenly the solution came out from nowhere. So yeah, it's hard to believe, but stuff like that happens. So the choice was obvious. We will use Composition API, and it led us to create readable, friendly, and hackable API. In comparison to old mixins, it looked much better because, for example, this is everything we needed to do to have a card. So very similar to the previous example with scope slot, but here we have full control over the return data. We can do anything with it. So this is the comparison of mixin. This gives us much more information about what this is holding. And thanks to the fact that Composition API returns reactive objects, you can do a lot of magic under the hood and just compose your application from like tiny independent micro applications that are these composition functions. So this is very handy. And we had those composables or composition functions. I'm not sure what is the most popular naming for that, because like the Vue community hasn't embraced any official naming for composition API functions. So I like to call them composables. So we had those composables to interact with all common data entities of e-commerce logic. So we had a composable to interact with products. We had a composable to interact with categories. We had a composable to interact with checkout and stuff like that. And each of them had a actually dedicated. So each of these entities had this dedicated micro application. And it significantly reduced the amount of code that we needed to write. But after playing with composables for some time, we realized another thing. Actually, we don't need Vues or any other state management tool, because Composition API handles it really good by itself. So take a look at this example. Under the hood, composables, so these Composition API functions are just functions. So each time we invoke it, we create a new instance of the returns data. In that case, this data is products and loading. So every time we invoke this product, we are creating new instances of that. So each invocation of this product has its local state. And that was pretty handy because if you design those functions well, you can actually use a single function to do different things on your application. Like here we use this product first to fetch some product, and then based on the returns data from that search, we are fetching another products that are related to that product. Always, also, when there is a need to have a single instance of certain object across many invocations of the same function, for example, when we have use cart, we have only one shopping cart in our application. So whenever we call this use cart, we want to have access to the same object. And it's also really simple because the only thing you need to do is actually to put your state on top of the function. So it's invoked only once. So whenever we are invoking use cart, we always have access to this single instance of cart. So actually, that's all you need to have a centralized application state. It's pretty handy, isn't it? The same way we use Composition API to write our own Vue-like state management for the UI part of the application. So here we have a state object, which is just a state. Then we have mutations under it, and we also have getters. So we are using this computed Composition API function to make getters. And by doing this, we actually have defined way of updating the state and defined way of getting the state data. And the state object itself is not muted, it's not mutable. So you can write your own views in just few lines of code, and it works pretty much the same, except the fact that it doesn't have all these additional functionalities that you can also build by yourself. And this is how we were able to use this UI state. So here we were importing it, this UI state object, and here we were just using it. And the big advantage of using UI state like that is the fact that you can benefit from auto suggestions, and you're not basing everything on strings. So basing everything on strings was, in my opinion, one of the biggest downsides of using Vues. Even though you could have put it into a variable, like mutation types, for example, it was still a bit of overhaul in my understanding. So to summarize, Composition API, like, to me, is seriously amazing. It's a major step forward because it makes your code so much easier and so much more capable of so many things. It's a huge milestone for Vue developer experience, and I really like that. Another tool that we decided to use was Nux.js. So I said some time ago that we needed to maintain our own server-side rendering, our own module system, and at some point, after building it for like 2 years, we came to the point where most of the features that we were adding was just copying Nux modules and adjusting them to our environment. So it was really useless. And at first we chose it mostly because of server-side rendering, but the more we played with it, the more we loved other features. And actually, this framework is extremely capable, and with its own module system, it can serve very well to the library authors, because actually you can hide everything inside modules, and modules have access to every part of Nux.js application lifecycle. They can register their own routes, they can extend the config. Everything you could imagine is probably possible for Nux module. Another ways of reducing amount of code to maintain, this time by our users, was to introduce a customizable component library. So they don't need to write components from scratch each time. And we call this library Storefront UI. And it's also a free open source project. So you can Google it. And we also have a Twitter, so you can follow it. And it's not tied to Vue Storefront itself. So Storefront UI can be used in any Vue.js project. So even though it was awesome, Composition API wasn't able to solve all of our issues, because one of the biggest advantages of headless architecture, as I said at the beginning, is ability to use different third-party services, add them, remove them, replace them. So we needed also to make that pretty simple. So this is more or less how Vue Storefront architecture looked like. So we had composables instead of directly fetching the data, and then we had a team that was using these composables, and we had Storefront UI on top of that. An API client was just a tiny data layer that was fueling those composables. API client method could look more or less like this. So every API call was represented by a single function. And we gave our users possibility to override those functions. And you could use them to, for example, enrich your data. Let's say you have a getProduct method, and getProduct method is called from the API client. Then it's used on the composable to get the data and then displayed on a theme. And it looks like that. So let's say we want to add something to our product. So we introduced an override method, which made that very simple. And then you can just call the basic getProduct method with this super, and you have this product return. Then you can enrich this product, let's say with the external review from some external service, and then return it. So by doing this, we actually gave users possibility to enrich data formats to change the data without introducing breaking changes to other parts of the application. You can even, fetch your products from some completely different resource, for example, from some specific middleware instead of your e-commerce platform. And once you want to get rid of that idea, you're just removing this 4 lines of code, and everything still works. And currently, Vue Storefront works mostly with Magento and different CMSs, but we have a concept called Vue Storefront Next. And actually, what I was talking today about is this Vue Storefront Next. So this is currently under development, and we are currently building 2 more integrations on Vue Storefront Next architecture you have just seen. So Shopware 6 is the first integration, and it's almost ready. And there's one thing I really love about Shopware integration is the fact that it's integrated with Shopware Page Builder. And this builder is actually, what you see and what you get builder, and how we are actually making it work with a Vue.js application. Well, it's pretty simple. So if you call the REST API of the Shopware builder, they are sending a huge JSON that's representing the tree of components they have. So the only thing that we needed to do is actually to map those components to Vue.js components. So this is on the left side, this is how you see it on the Shopware builder, and it's sending as JSON. And on the right side, this is how you see this on Vue Storefront. And once the client creates its own theme, they actually only need to customize the components, and they can still leverage the builder. So it's pretty cool. And this is just a beginning, because we have a lot of cool features on our roadmap, and we can't wait to ship them. So we want to, of course, let people generate the projects with all the third-party tools they want for CLI. We are working on visual editor for Vue Storefront website. We're also working on many more integrations, including About You Cloud, WooCommerce, Shopify, Adobe Experience Manager, and much more. And what I want you to take from this presentation is not only the stuff about Composition API, but to those that are working with e-commerce stuff, I really want you to understand that e-commerce development doesn't need to be painful, and that we are just warming up and we'll deliver much more. And if you like what you saw, you can give us a star and at github.com/devanteltd/VueStorefront. Or you can also check Vue Storefront Next repos on those addresses. And this is a really good example of usage of Composition API. And we're always free, we're always open source, and we're building stuff from the community to the community. So it's free of charge. You can easily just check it, use it, or do whatever you want with that. Thank you very much. I hope you are still there, because we're all after work.
I guess we have some time now to take a look at some questions. If somebody has any questions, you can type it on the chat. Let's see. I'm trying to see here. So far, I don't think we have any questions. Oh, there it is. First question.
Oh, nice. Someone has a question.
Coming from Marco. How does Vue Storefront compare to Reaction Commerce?
Oh God. So I will start with the front-end framework. So they are using React and we are using Vue.js. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, Vue Storefront is just a front-end. So it can work with any backend platform. And Reaction Commerce is a full solution that has its front-end and its backend. So I think that will be the main difference. We are not focusing on backend at all. You can just connect your APIs and it will work with Vue Storefront.
There you go. Let's see.
If you guys also have questions about Composition API and like some thoughts on this, I will be happy to answer, because we used it with Next, and as you can imagine, that was really challenging. Because Next is not officially supporting Composition API yet.
Well, let's give it a few more seconds to see if somebody pops in another question.
Oh, I see so many people I know already on the chat.
Really?
Hey guys.
Well, oh, there you go. I think Michael is asking a question.
Do I think that the version next will be ready at the same time as Vue freely release? Yes, I do. If Vue freely release will happen within 2 months, then yes. Actually, like for the shopware part, we are pretty close to being ready. And with the commerce tools parts and with all the other integrations, of course, it will take a little bit more time. But the core of Vue Storefront Next will be ready. At least our goal is to release it at the same time as Vue Free will be released.
Okay, there's another good question here from Jeez. Let's see, because I think we mentioned the capybara, right? So some time ago, somebody asked why the VSF1 demo was not giving a Lighthouse score, that VSF1 demo was using old theme with capybara. Would that improve?
So Lighthouse is a pretty tricky tool, to be honest. If you're measuring performance with Lighthouse, it's not always giving you an accurate result, especially when you're using tools like web page test, page split insights, no web page test, page split insights. Because, for example, page split insights is not taking into account HTTP2. So if you have a lot of prefetching, it might wrongly calculate your time to interactive. And this is exactly what is happening with Vue Storefront. So we're prefetching a lot of things. And even though the website is fully interactive after like 5 or 6 seconds, if you're measuring it with page split insights, it shows like 20-something seconds of time to interactive, because it waits until everything is prefetched. And it also waits until it's prefetched with HTTP1 protocol, which has a limitation, like I think 5 parallel connections. So that would be about Lighthouse score, but also, I mean, it's not totally wrong. It's also telling you a lot of information that are valid. And coming back to your question, it will improve with Capybara, but it will improve mostly because with other performance improvements, not related to this particular thing.
Nice. Okay, we'll take one last question. I guess the next one on the line, I guess this one goes right hand in hand with the stuff that we talked about today. Any gotchas or pitfalls you'd want to talk about with the composition API? Well, you're talking to the master because you worked on it, right?
Okay, so basically there are many gotchas. It's like one of the gotchas we had was the fact that if you're using symlinks in your repositories, so basically if you have a monorepo, for some reason, the Composition API plugin is usually not working because it creates multiple instances of Composition API plugin. So the solution I came up for that was making an alias that was making sure that the Composition API plugin is always took from the same node modules folder. Another gotcha was problem with server-side rendering. There is actually no established way of using server-side rendering with Composition API yet. There, of course, we have this on-server prefetch. But the problem with on-server prefetch is that previously it was meant to be used once per component. So you had one on-server prefetch per component. So it was pretty simple because when component was rendering on the server side, it was waiting when on-server prefetch is finished, and then it was outputting you code. Now with Composition API, you can have even 10 or 20 on-server prefetches from this Composition API functions. And I think at least in Next, it's not waiting till all of them have ended. It's waiting till only the first one is ended. So if you have a situation that one Composition API function on the server-side rendering is returning something that another Composition API function is needing, then it just won't work. And we came with a workaround for that. And also workaround for that would be asynchronous setup method. So asynchronous setup method is something that is not yet in the Composition API plugin, and as far as I know, it wouldn't be there because of some limitations of the Vue 2 itself, but it will be in Vue 3. So in Vue 3, you can just await those functions that are invoked. But basically, it's really hard to make it work right now. And if you're curious how we solved that, on our repo we have a composition function called use SSR. So you can check the implementation. And also there's a libraries, it's called SRVN or something like that. So it's co-created by Alexander Chopin from Next, and it's also solving some of the issues, but it's not solving the issue I talked about as well. So using server-side rendering with Composition API right now is not something you want to do seriously. Just wait till you have a Vue 3.
Not worth the trouble. Okay. Well, Filip, I'd like to thank you for spending the time to enlighten us today about Storefront and the Composition API. I really appreciated having you here today.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Thank you, and thanks for listening to me. I know it's tough after hours, after probably 8 hours of working.
No, I'm pretty sure everybody is very excited to hear what you have to say. So thank you again, man.
Thank you.
All right, so on to our next speaker. So this beautiful lady that you see on the screen right now is Natalia, and I wanted her to actually correct what I said because I don't know how I said her name. So is it Tepluhina that you say your name, your last name?
No, and no. Every single time English speaker is trying to pronounce my last name, like one kitten dies in the world because it's pronounced as Tepluhina.
Oh, okay. Okay, I would never be able to say it. So I apologize for murdering your name. So,
It's
but
completely fine, no worries.
yeah, we are very happy to have you here today. So Natalia, she is a Vue core team member, Vue.js core team member, and she's also a Google developer expert. She's a senior front-end engineer at GitLab. It's an honor to have you here. And she's going to be talking to us about Vue Apollo. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And the time is yours, Natalia. Please take the stand.
Awesome. I'm really happy to talk here today. And I think we can share my screen now. So today we're going to speak about Apollo Client. And first of all, I want to share my slides because I've seen there were some people asking for slides, but I also wanted this talk to be a bit more interactive for you. So I will be sharing the code, the repository you can just clone and follow my live coding. Yes, I will have live coding in my session because I don't know, maybe I secretly love failing in public. So let me just share it. And here we go. So while I will be giving a small overview of this talk, feel free to just clone the repo and check what's there. And please check out an initial branch. Just don't open master because there are like lots of spoilers there. So this talk is not going to be a Vue and GraphQL talk because I believe I can speak about GraphQL itself for hours. But this was already done really nicely by some amazing people like Sarah Vieira about GraphQL and Apollo and Vue is magic, and Guillaume Cho, who is also the author of Vue Apollo integration, and he gave a talk about what is GraphQL and Vue. By the way, you probably know Guillaume Cho is acronym. He is also the co-author of Vue CLI and Vue DevTools. Today we're going to speak rather about the client implementation of the GraphQL. And when I say client for some API, you probably think about Axios, right? About something that just fetches the data from the API and helps you to do so. In fact, Apollo client is a bit more complicated because it's not only fetching the data from the API, but also storing the data. This means Apollo client could replace Vuex in your application because it has its own cache and you can fetch the data from this cache, not only from the API, from across your application. And we will stop on this in the part of the talk. So, as Ben already said, my name is Natalia, and I'm a Vue.js core team member. I mostly focus on the documentation, but I also enjoy contributing to the CLI, to Vue Apollo. I contributed a lot to Vue Apollo documentation. I know it's still far from perfect. I'm also a Google developer expert in web technologies, which means Google kind of recognizes me as a person who knows how to use Chrome DevTools, and we will use console a lot in this talk as well. And I work as a senior front-end engineer at GitLab, and during my daily job, I use Apollo and GraphQL a lot because we're building our own application on top of the GraphQL API. So let's start from the part of how do we fetch data in our application. First, let's take a look on the traditional structure. Like imagine we have a Vuex and some REST API, and we want to fetch some data. So what do? We dispatch an action. It triggers an API call. If it's successful, we commit success mutation. If it's not successful, we will commit an error mutation. And this is the moment when your state is changed. Well, this feels like quite a boilerplate for such a simple thing like fetching something from API and storing. But yeah, this is fine because you have a fine-grained control of everything. And I didn't even touch loading state. So how does this apply to Apollo client? As you can see, Apollo client simply performs a query and it gives you a success or error state, and after this state is changed. And the great thing about Apollo client is these two actions are done automatically for you by the client. And also it handles a loading state. Sounds kind of fantastic. Let's take a look on how this is implemented. Oh, by the way, during the live coding, we will use a Vue Composition API because yeah, seems like it's a trend right now. And we will use Vue Apollo version 4. So if you're already using Apollo client and you think that syntax is kind of different, don't worry. Vue Apollo 4 will also support an old syntax, but I want to show you something new as well. So let's take a look at the application. And yeah, it's kind of complaining us, like do some live coding first. Maybe I also secretly love building some passive-aggressive applications. So let's start live coding. Here, you can see a very simple GraphQL query. This query is designed to fetch some characters from Rick and Morty API. And we want to see some ID name, location, and image as a result. So let's build this query in our characters component. So we want to have some result, and we will name it like char result. And we also want to have a loading state. And for this, we are going to use query. I was just showing you. It's characters query. Let's use our console. And let's also return the loading state from our setup. And let's also set characters to the empty array, because otherwise this application will complain at me again. So let's go to the page, refresh it. And as you can see, we already have some loading here. Awesome, but this is not enough. Let's check our console to see, it's already complaining at me. Okay, let's refresh it. Yeah, so this is our char result. And as you can see, it's a ref import something. This means we're using a ref here from Vue 3 Composition API. So we have a reactive value. This is an object that has a value property, that has characters, that has results, and finally we can see an array of characters we need to render here. That's why I didn't actually return a char result, but just console logged it, because we need to extract these results to use them in the component. So let's do this. Vue Apollo 4 has not only use query hook for queries, but also use result for extracting results. So let's say that characters is equal to use result. And here we need to provide the result we want to extract, a default value, it will be null, and a function that will return what we need from the data. And we need data, characters, results. And I can remove this placeholder and check what's going on here. So awesome. We fetched some characters from the API and we can see this. But remember, I was speaking about storing this information in the cache. Let's check this Apollo tab in the DevTools. And if you wonder what's this is actually Apollo DevTools plugin from Chrome. As you can see here, we have queries, mutations, and the cache. And right now we are interested in cache. So all our characters right now are put to the storage that is named Apollo Cache. And next time when we are going to fetch characters, first it will look to the cache, and only after this it will try to fetch more characters from the network. This is a default policy for Apollo client. It's also called cache and network. Kinda intuitive, right? You can change it if you want to only fetch from network or only fetch from cache. And this is our next case. So everything is cool. You fetched some data, you're showing it out to us in the cache, but what about local state? And I mean local state, something you are not fetching from the API, something you're creating in the application to only use locally. Yeah. And this state could be really, really complicated. So local state in the application using Apollo client is implemented as Apollo cache. And I'm saying everything is Apollo cache because in the application, Apollo cache is a single source of truth, just like Vuex in the typical Vue application. How it's implemented? Let's take a look at this query. So if I wanted to fetch some favorite characters from the API, I would use this normal query. And this query will fetch something from the cache if it's already there, or just go to network if cache is empty. But what if I want to fetch favorite characters from cache only without any kind of network? I'm just adding a small directive here named client. This tells Apollo client, don't go to the API. Just give me what you have in the cache. And of course, to fetch something from the cache, first we will need to write some data there. And we can do this with a helper that's called write data. What about changing? In GraphQL, if you want to change anything on the server, you're sending a mutation. In this case, we will do completely the same. We will send a mutation, but we're sending it only to our local cache. And of course, we need to handle this mutation properly. We need to read the cache, update the data, and write data back to the cache. It's something similar to what Vuex mutation is doing, because we are checking the application state, we're changing something in the state. Okay, talk is cheap. Show me the code. As you can see, I have few more queries here. And if you look really, really attentively, you probably realize that these queries are red. This means like we cannot query field favorite characters. Why? Because I also have an Apollo DevTools and Apollo plugin in my VS Code. And this plugin performs linting against schema. And my schema right now is fetched from the Rick and Morty API. And of course, this schema doesn't have favorite characters type. Of course, we can just disable a plugin and ignore this. But the strong feature of the GraphQL API in general and GraphQL schema in particular is it's strongly typed. That means if you're using TypeScript on your frontend, you can generate your types and interfaces right away from the GraphQL schema. That's why when you want to add some more types on the frontend, like only client, if you want to add some queries, it's strongly recommended to extend your schema. So we'll do. Let's go here and let's add some type definitions here. We will use GQL templater, and we want to extend type query. We just want to add our favorite characters, and it will return an array of characters. That's it. As you can see, the query right now is perfectly normal. And if we click here, yeah, it's actually this type is here, and character type is a type we're fetching from the API. Now, let's try to work with this. So Here we're doing completely the same as we did for characters. So there will be a result. Let's say result. And we will use a favorite characters query. I'm not going to use result here. I will just use a fab result and its value to access the results in the isn't favorites helper. So what do we want to see here? It will be fab result value. This is very important because this is a Vue ref, and you should remember to always access the ref's value if you're working in the script part. Because in the template, it's automatically unwrapped for you, but in the script, please remember to use value. Favorite characters, some, let's say fab. So if we have char ID equal to fab ID. Okay. And we forgot very important thing. We are trying to fetch something from favorite characters, but we didn't add any characters here. So let's make write data. And it will be data, favorite characters. Let's say it will be an empty array. Let's go to our application and check if we have favorite characters here. Yes, it's an empty array. To make it more fun, let's add some fancy character to this array. So let's just copy paste it and check it again. So do we have a favorite character? Yes. Is it showing in our application now? Yes, again, you can see this nice blue background. This means Ellie and Rick is in favorites right now. We can also check it here. And right now we can start adding something to favorites. Let's look at the console again. Okay, I want to add Rick. And of course I have an error because we didn't define add to favorites. Let's do this. So in our characters view, I want to call a mutation. And I want to give it an alias add to favorites. And I want to use add to favorites mutation. And also, one more important thing about Composition API, a very typical fail I always do. Don't forget to return everything from your setup function. Okay, we have add to favorites. Now, let's go and check how does it work. Still nothing happens, but let's check mutation tab. Is something called here? Yes, we're actually having the mutation here, and we are trying to add this to favorites. As you can see, we have all the data required here, and now we need to write something to explain to our Apollo client what we expect to see when we run this mutation. Because when you have a GraphQL API, you run the mutation and your backend defines the reaction to this, which is called resolver. So we will write our first client-side resolver. And as you can see, it's complaining at me again because it doesn't have character input type. And the easiest fix you could imagine is to make it have character. No way, because it's non-input type. So I will just add an input type here. Let's say it has an ID. And it's already happy, as you can see, because in fact it's accepting more. Let's be strict. And let's say we want to have a name as a string. We want to have image as a string. And we want to have a location. as a location type from the schema. Okay, now I'm really nice. If I was really nice, I would also add a mutation here. But right now we have limited time, so I will just cheat a bit and don't add a mutation to type types. So now let's work on the resolver here. And you can see resolvers are passed to Apollo client. So we are writing a resolver for a mutation. And this is add to favorites. First parameter here is parent context. We don't need it in this mutation. Second is a parameter we're passing to mutation. You can check it here. So we want to pass a character. And third parameter is the context of this mutation. And we only need a cache from it. Now, first step, we want to read our cache and retrieve something that is stored in the favorite characters query. You can see this in your Apollo DevTools. And this is just an array of favorite characters. So it will be cache read query. And query here is favorite characters. Next step, we want to add this new character to our favorite characters array. Oh no. And after this, we need to write this new data back to cache. As you can see here, I'm mutating data. Previously, it was a good practice, but since Apollo 2.6, they are encouraging people to actually change the cache only with immutable dates. And since Apollo version 3, it will be a requirement. So I'm saving some time here just mutating the data, but if you consider working with Apollo client further, you will need to learn immutable updates. So here we are writing our query back. Again, query will be favorite characters query, and we need to pass some data here. Okay. Now when I click add to favorites, you can see this blue background, and if we go to favorites, it's right here. Now let's work on removing from favorites, and this is almost the same as adding to favorites. So we will do some repetition just to remember the pattern. We will go to favorites component. As you can see, it's already fetching favorite characters, even using result. And we will write one more mutation here. It will use remove from favorites mutation. We will return it here as a method. And I will just copy paste this to write a resolver. So it's remove from favorites. And instead of characters, we are passing an ID here as a parameter. This part will remain the same, as well as writing the query back. We're only changing the logic for favorite characters. It will be data favorite characters filter. We need to exclude the character with this ID from the favorite characters array. Okay, let's check if it works. Add some more. Nope, it doesn't. So what happened here? Char is not defined. Yep, because I just forgot to do this. So I'm just, okay, I will put it's a new pretter, I guess. It's just wrapping and even a single argument in brackets. So are you happy now? Yes, now it works fine. And we can add and remove them endlessly. But let's continue the talk. It's awesome if you have a brand new application. When you already have a GraphQL API and you're building on top of it. But what about some legacy and about migrating from the REST API? Of course, you can follow the way of let's just have it in Vuex, let's trigger a GraphQL calls from Vuex actions and store everything to Vuex. And that's a completely legit way, just don't forget to disable Apollo cache. But for me, it feels slightly wrong. You're like disabling the half of the functionality of the tool. Could we do it in a different way? Could we just wrap a REST API in Apollo client? In fact, yes. We just need to write a correct resolver and make a characters query, a local one with the client. And if we do so, our Apollo client will trigger a GraphQL call, slightly like a GraphQL call to the cache, and our resolver will fetch data from the REST API endpoint. Then we can shape it, and we can store it to Apollo cache. Okay, let's try to do so. So as a first step, we go to characters and say, now this is a local query. Let's check the application after this. And like, yeah, again, do some live coding, do some work. Okay, now we write a correct resolver for this. So we have a query named characters, and we want to fetch something from the REST API. It's character endpoint. And let's work with the console again. Let's see what do we have in the structure that is returned from the REST API. So we have data that has some info we don't care about, and we have an array of results. And every single one also has lots of fields we don't need. We just need ID, name, image, and whatever we have in the character type. So let's try to do this. So we will return an object. And first, very important thing, if you want to wrap your REST API responses with Apollo client. Apollo client works with GraphQL. GraphQL is strongly typed. That's why we need to add a type name to every single object we have. So first will be type name. It will be characters. And we have results. It will be res data results map. So we have a chart here, and we want to return an object again. And again, this is an object, so type name. It will be character. And here we will have a name that is equal to char name image, which is a char image ID, which is a char ID. Oops. And location. And if you assume it should be a char location, you're wrong, because this is an object. And don't forget about type name. And here we have name of char, location, name. Cool. And wow, it did work. Usually I just fail here. And then I do some debugging with the console, but not this time. So right now, if we go to Network tab and refresh the page, you can see that we don't have GraphQL calls. Instead, we have a REST API call. In fact, right now it's from this cache. And it's returning us an array. It doesn't show because it's 3 or 1. But if we go to Apollo and check the cache here, you will see no difference comparing to the GraphQL API. So you can do this while migrating from REST to GraphQL, and you can wait for backend to migrate your queries to the GraphQL API. Okay. Now, even more extreme case. Now we just spoke about we have REST API, we don't have a GraphQL one. But what if your backend is not ready? What if you need to build an interface and you don't have anything to fetch? Again, we have a resolver and we can mock data with a resolver. Let's do so. So I already mocked some data in the mock.js. I will just need to import it here. And instead of returning this complex logic here, I will just return mock data. And you can see it changed, but all the logic, like with the REST API, is in place. You can add to favorites, you can remove from favorites. And if you agreed on the shape of your data, and by shape of your data, I mean this, you can simply wait for your backend to prepare the API. And after this, you will just simply remove client from here and resolver from your resolver's object. And you're ready for the API. And I think it was it. You can find this demo repository. I already linked it there. So there is a link one more time. And it was really nice to speak here.
That was a very good presentation, Natalia. Thank you so much for taking the time to prepare it. I was hoping that maybe we can give some time now to our guests to ask some questions if they would be willing to. So,
sure.
Yeah. So if you guys watching this streaming right now, if you have any questions for Natalia, now is the time. And may I just remind you guys that she is a core Vue.js core team member, so she could give you some very good insights.
Don't ask me when the release is.
You can't know, right? That one is a secret. I see there's either some Ukrainian or some Russian going on there. I don't know any of those languages, so I can't read those. So maybe you can check for me, Natalia.
It's just thanking me.
Oh, it's just thanking you. There.
Yeah.
I think everybody's very grateful for you being here anyway. So I'll just give it a few more seconds just to make sure that nobody has any comments or any questions. Let's see.
So just one more note. If you come with a question later, I will be still watching the stream and I can give some answers right in the YouTube chat. Or you can just reach out to me on Twitter DMs if you're intimidated to ask it publicly.
Yep, and may I remind you guys that this is also going to be made available after the live. Oh, there it is. Well, let's take one question then. So here we go. How do you feel about working with multiple caches? Oh, that's a good question.
Honestly, I would still prefer to have a single source of truth, because working with multiple caches feels like we are just splitting the data between them. But if you really need it, I mean, I'm trying to imagine the case for multiple caches and I can't. But if you really have the case, you can try to do so.
I guess it's every case is a case, right? Okay, so I guess for now we're good. I just wanted to thank you again, Natalia, for your contribution. We're very happy to have you here today. Hopefully we can have you here again in the future. And I guess we all aspire to have the same skills that you just shared today. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, on to our next guest today. Hello, Callum. Welcome.
Hey, hi.
So Callum, he's a senior front-end developer, and he's going to talk to us today a little bit about using SVGs with Vue. So I'm excited to see that as well. So Callum, I'll just let you take the time now. We're glad to have you here today. So Oh, let me see. You already sharing your screen. There you go. Time is yours.
Sweet. Hey, yeah, I'm Callum, and today I'm going to be talking about, well, my two favorite things, Vue and SVG. So my name's Callum Macrae. These are like my three favorite things to work with, and I've somehow managed to fit them all into one talk. So I'm having a great time right now. SVG, animation, and Vue. I've written a book. It's called Vue.js Up and Running, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my handle. Cool. So I'm going to talk about how we can use SVG in Vue. We're all familiar with how we can use Vue with HTML, but it also lets us use it with SVG. So we're going to start out by building a bar chart. So it's a fairly simple structure. It's 6 rectangles and some text. So I'm gonna avoid using like HTML words like div. Yeah, so 6 rectangles, colors. Text. So let's start off by defining that view and data. So here I'm just randomly generating an array of 6 items with 6
Hi,
random.
Callum. I think we had a problem with your audio for a few moments. So if you maybe can backtrack less than 10 seconds or so, just letting you know.
How far was I still on this slide?
I think you were already in this slide. It was literally like 5 to 10 seconds ago. So.
Okay, so yeah, so we're gonna build a bar chart, 6 rectangles and 6 pieces of text in SVG and Vue. So to start off with, we're going to define our data in Vue. So this is just creating chart data, which is an array of 6 items, which are all whole numbers, integers between 1 and 20. And this is going to stay pretty consistent for basically the first half of the talk. So let's start with defining this in HTML, because it is completely possible to do this in HTML, even if SVG is the best option. So here we're iterating through our chart data, creating 6 divs with 60 pixels high, and then we're generating a width from the data, which looks like this. So it's given us 6 divs, all displaying below each other. I'm also adding some styling in the CSS. So I'm adding some margin bottom and some background color. But this is HTML. HTML isn't really ideal for this kind of stuff, for shapes and layout. It's designed for documents, right? So the best technology we can use here is SVG. While this example, it works fine in HTML, it's possible. The more complicated stuff it gets very difficult in HTML. So we're going to use SVG. SVG looks a lot like HTML. So SVG is XML, kind of similar to HTML. And we can write it directly in our HTML document, which means we can get Vue to do it for us. So if we just take this exact same code and do the same thing using SVG, it looks like this. So whereas before we had a div element which we were attaching Vue to, now we've got an SVG element. And inside that SVG element, we've got 6 rectangles, which is an SVG element which just makes a rectangle, basically. And you'll notice the props have changed, but it looks exactly the same. So I'll talk through the props. We've got our v4 directive, which is exactly the same. We're just outputting that 6 times. And then instead of our margin bottom and our height, we've got X, Y, height, and width, which are properties directly on the rectangle. So the X and Y, it's the X and Y positions from the top left of the SVG canvas. And the height and the X value we're hard coding because they're the same for every single one. Then the Y we're increasing with the index, so they display below each other, and the width is again being set from the value. We're also we're using CSS to style this, but it's not really CSS in the same way that CSS works with HTML. So here we've got fill. We're using fill instead of background color. It accepts the same values, so all standard colors that you can use in CSS. And we've got other properties like we've got stroke and stroke color instead of border. But it's CSS with SVG works differently to HTML. It's kind of the equivalent to attributes. So if you see here, you can specify the fill directly on the rectangle element. That's effectively what the CSS is doing. You could also put the X value and the height in there if you wanted to. But cool, if you go back to our original example, you remember the original chart, it had labels. So how do we do that with SVG? Well, to do that with SVG, so to start off with, we will add another level because while this is XML and we have a rectangle element which you could pass children to, this isn't how we do it in SVG. So we have to add another element called the text element. But before we do that, we're going to add it into a group. So we're going to take our rectangle element and we're going to wrap it in this G element, which is a group. It's kind of like the SVG equivalent of a div. It contains stuff but doesn't actually show stuff itself, which isn't always strictly true in HTML, but is true in SVG. It just contains stuff. So our height and our width we're still setting on the rectangle, but we're now positioning it using the group instead. And we're no longer positioning it using X and Y, we're using a transform. That's the way it works with groups. So now this means everything inside the group is positioned. So for now, it looks exactly the same. But if we take this, then if we add a text element, you'll notice we've said y equals 30 instead of y equals I times 70 plus 30 or whatever it would have been. So this is now positioning it relatively to the group, which means it looks like this. Pretty much exactly what we wanted it to look like. We've also added some extra CSS for this text. So the fill white is how we change the color of it. And then the font is fairly similar to how it works with HTML. But then we've got two new properties, text anchor and alignment baseline, which define the positioning relative to the point we've defined it on. So I've got a couple examples. So the default text positioning is the default text anchor is start, which means the text will display to the left of the point. This is kind of how it works with HTML usually as well. So you move it to a point and then it starts there and then displays outwards from the point. But we've got a couple other options. We've got text anchor middle, which means the text displays around the point equal to the left and the right of where you're defining it to. So if you have x equals 20 and it's 40 pixels wide, it will start at 0 and end at 40. And we've got text anchor end, which is what we want here because we want to position it relative to the right-hand side of the rectangles. So if we had text anchor start and we could just position it, we could have text anchor start and then position it, say, 30 pixels to the left. But then if we had a really long number, it would overflow. So we don't really want that. So that's text anchor. Alignment baseline is fairly similar, but it's on the y-axis instead of the x-axis. So the default alignment baseline is baseline, which means it appears above the line. We've also got alignment baseline hanging, which is below the line, but in this case, we want alignment baseline middle, which means it displays in the middle. There's a bunch of different. There's not just these three properties. There's like a bunch of different alignment baselines that all do different things, but that's a bit out of the scope of this talk. Cool. So let's go back to our SVG. So you can see this works. This works as expected. We've got our group, we've got our rectangle, we've got our text. It's displaying nicely, but we can do more with this. So what about if we animate it next? So you can see this isn't like a normal animation because we're not just animating the width. You can see the numbers are changing. it's probably a bad idea to do an animation on a talk that's streamed online. But you might be able to see, depending on how good my internet connection is and your internet connection is, the numbers are changing as they move. So it's not just jumping from 20 to 8. It's going down slowly, and it's going through 19, 18, 17, all the way down. So this is like different to a lot of animations that Vue can help us with. And actually, can Vue help us with this? So no, well, not really. It can a bit. But so Vue can help us with some things. Vue can help us with enter transitions. So if we added a new item to this chart, Vue could help us display it with, say, a fade in or something. Vue can also help us move transitions, list move transitions. If, say, we're changing the order of the bar chart, I'm sure you've seen the charts recently online of the coronavirus cases in various countries where you can see countries increase and then countries overtake each other. Vue could help us with that, but Vue doesn't really help us with transitioning state. So to do that, we're going to use a library. We're going to use GreenSock. So they've got a library called GSAP, which is I think it's the GreenSock animation platform. And we're going to use this for its tweening capabilities. So tweening is the process of generating intermediate frames between images called keyframes. And what this means is that, I mean, I think it's from proper animation where you've got like cartoons, or to use a simple example, it's if you are animating from a square to a circle, it's like the intermediate stages where it be, I don't know, a rounded rectangle or something like that. There's loads of libraries available to do this, but GSAP's the one I used before, so I'll talk about that. But before we dig into that, let's change our code a bit in Vue to make it a bit to separate out a bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our group, our rectangle, and our text into a component. So now in our SVG, we're calling this component, we're passing it the value, and then the component is responsible for its width and height. The component isn't responsible for its positioning. That's still outside the component being passed in as a transform, just in order to simplify the component. So yeah, this should make it simpler to handle the animation. So the SVG itself and everything at the top level in the app won't need to worry about the animation. We're gonna set it up so that when the value prop of the component changes, it animates itself. Cool. So let's go back to GSAP and look at how we can use tweening to help us. So GSAP defines this gsap.to function, which effectively it's designed for animating properties on an object. For example, we could have an element outside the world of Vue. We could have an element which has opacity 0, and we could say gsap.to to say the element, duration 1 second, opacity 1. And it will it'll animate the opacity from 0 to 1. But in this case, we can also use GSAP's tweening function to animate a value, a number. So we're passing it this $data, which is kind of a shortcut for the data object. Not a short, it's where the data object is stored. So if we set this $data.number, it will change the value. It will change the value. I'm sure we could just pass it this. I haven't tried it. This is how the Vue documentation does it. Cool. So in this example, this is a simple Vue app which just displays a number. So here we're saying over the duration of 4 seconds, tween the number from 0 to 1,000. And that looks like this. It's also, you might have noticed, it also added some ease out stuff. So it started off quickly, then slowed down towards the end. This is like completely configurable, but we'll leave that for now. Cool. So back to our component. So if we just look at the component, we don't need to worry about the Vue app anymore. We just need to worry about the component. So to make this easier to understand, we will move. So we're going to create a width computer property, which has value times 30 in. We've got this twice in our template, and it's going to make things easier if we like move it to a computer property. And in order to animate this, we're going to have to add some way of having an animated value. We obviously can't mutate the prop. That would break everything. Don't do that. So we're going to create a new property of the data object called tweened value, which we're going to animate to whenever the value is changed. So we're going to add a watcher. So whenever the value is changed, we're going to call gsap.to, the tweening function, which over the course of 0.6 seconds is going to animate tweened value to equal the new value passed in the prop. And then we're going to go back to our width computer property and make that use the tween value instead. So now if we look at that, we can see our widths are being animated. So this is nice, but our numbers still aren't being animated. You can see they're jumping between. So number 3 just went straight from number 3 to number 20 without the values in between. It'd be nice if we were able to display if we were able to animate the numbers as well. So we could just put tween value in instead of value in the text element, but then we'd end up with like huge decimal points. So we're going to put math.round in instead. It will probably be better to use a filter. I'm not really sure the best way of doing this. Yeah, so we can see, well, I can see, I don't know, depending on the frame rate, if you can see this, but I can see, and I'll tweet a link out to CodePen afterwards, that the numbers are being animated too. So this approach of calling gsap.to, of getting it to handle the tweening for us, it works well if we've got a small number of elements, but if you have a chart with, I don't know, 1,000 elements in, calling this function so many times and so many components might not be the best approach. So after this talk, I will tweet out a link to a CodePen where I'm basically handling the tweening in the app. So the component doesn't exist in that. Everything's been handled at the top level. The entire array is being tweened, which is a bit more performant over large data sets. So we've seen bar charts. What else can we do? So there's a subreddit, which I'm a huge fan of, and it's basically the only reason I go on Reddit anymore. It's called Data is Beautiful. I'm really into data visualization, and it's where I go for inspiration. So today I went and filtered down by the last month, and I picked a few that we can replicate in Vue. So this kind of visualization where we just got a bunch of numbers and colors, this would be perfectly possible in Vue. We might not even use SVG for this. This might be possible in just HTML. We can do more animations. We can animate a scatterplot. This is a visualization of child mortality rates over the last, I don't know, a couple 100 years. It's also a pretty interesting visualization, but we can't do, I mean, so Vue, this approach doesn't really help us with line charts. Because line charts in SVGs don't work the same way that circles or rectangles or shapes like that do. So in an SVG, the way we do a line is like this. We use our path element and give it a D attribute with a line in it, with a string defining the line. So here, what's happening is M means, it's like a pen, sort of. It's like a pen. Where we're saying move the pen to coordinate 10, 10, draw a line to 50 or 100, draw the line to 250. So Vue hasn't really helped us here yet. And we can write the JavaScript to output this. This simple line is fine. But if we do more complicated lines like this, where we're trying to output a smooth curve, sometimes if a curve gets too steep, they can intersect themselves. They can go around in a circle. and the maths to handle the cases like this is a bit of a nightmare, which is why people use libraries like D3. So D3 is a data visualization library. It's super powerful. It basically lets you do anything, any sort of visualization you want. It handles the DOM, it handles your data. It can handle updating the data, removing the data, stuff like that. But I've used it quite a bit in the past, but I found you always end up with just one massive file with loads of stuff after each other and no real structure, which is like a big advantage of Vue. But D3 is split out into lots of smaller libraries, and one of those libraries is D3 Shape, which contains a bunch of helpers which help us with our shapes. So there's examples like lines. It'll help us. In this case, this is from the this is actually from the Introducing D3 article. It can do some really interesting stuff. I'd recommend going and checking out the gallery of stuff made with D3 Shape. But it turns out we can actually use just this bit of D3 with Vue. So here I've made a component where you pass in some data in an array, and then all this component does is it uses just the line. It calls the D3 line helper, passes it the data, which then returns a string, and it outputs a line. I really wanted to go more into detail with this. I was hoping to do some. So this line helper is incredibly powerful. You can also pass in JSON data of the entire world, and it'll output an image of the world. D3 has some amazing stuff it could build in, but unfortunately I ran out of time when writing this talk. So hopefully I'll manage to get some stuff done this weekend and tweet it out. But that's the end of my examples. But yeah, using D3 with Vue, it opens up a whole world of visualizations possible with Vue, combining the power of D3 with the ease of use, reactivity, and structure of Vue. Because with this example above, with D3, when data is updated, you have to manually. It does some stuff for you, but it's not as easy as it could be. It's not a massive easy process. Whereas in this component, any data you pass to the chart line component, if you update the data, the component will automatically update. And it's not doing it in the most efficient way because I haven't optimized it at all. This is a very simple example. But it's in a very simple example, it's already got reactivity built in. So hopefully I'm going to have some time to play with this some more. Hopefully all of you are going to see this, think, wow, what can I do with this, and go and have a play with it. Because I hadn't realized it was possible until I'd realized the first half of this talk was possible, but I was just researching this talk and I was like, actually I can just use the utility functions in D3. So yeah, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So yeah, I hope I've inspired some of you. I hope I've taught you some SVG and shown you that how you can use SVG with Vue.
Okay, thank you so much, Callum. It was very nice to have you today. I was hoping that maybe we can also give some time for our attendees to ask you some questions if they would be inclined to do so. And I believe we already got one coming in. Let's see. Sandeep is asking, this SVG path plus Vue is exactly what I was looking for. Can the D3 line lib do animations as well?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I think he wants to know if the D3 library that you're just showcasing for us is also able to do animations as well.
Yeah, absolutely, it can. D3, it's an amazingly powerful library. It's quite awkward to learn how to use. It can take a while, but you can basically do anything with D3. And indeed, with examples, with cases in the past, I've just had a Vue component where it's part of an app, and then I've just left everything else to D3 without using Vue. Yeah, so yes, basically.
I guess D3 just has a learning curve, right? Because it's such a powerful tool. So as with any powerful tool, there's usually a kind of a steep learning curve until you actually get very productive with it.
Yeah, definitely. And even once you've learned it, it's incredibly easy to write completely unmaintainable apps with D3, I've found. Because it's just like you sort of end up in a pattern of you end up with a file where it's like here's your x-axis, y-axis, rectangles, titles, and then suddenly you've written your entire app in one file, your entire visualization in one file, and it's completely unmaintainable. So I think combining Vue with that could make it. I mean, there's ways of structuring D3 apps that don't result in that, but I think if you used it with Vue, you'd get that built in.
Awesome. I mean, I don't want to stir up the animosity between the React team, the Angular team, Svelte, and so forth, but we do have a question about your take on the weaknesses and strengths of using SVG with Vue. I don't know if you're familiar with the usage of SVG with other frameworks as well, so I don't know. But here's the question: what is your opinion? What are the strengths and weaknesses of using SVG with Vue as compared to React, Angular, and Svelte?
I haven't used SVG with any other framework. So I think if I answered that question, I'd be speculating.
Yeah, that's what it is. Because you are the expert with Vue, so I mean, we can't assume that.
I am 4 months into a React contract at the moment.
Oh, there you go.
But not using SVG.
But as far as using SVGs with Vue, have you ran into any kind of? I mean, you even mentioned some of them, right? With the lines when you're trying to do some very lines that intersect each other, right? That's kind of hard to animate. But I guess that would.
I mean, that would be hard. That would be hard in any framework, or that would be hard in vanilla JavaScript. It's just a complicated problem, and it's a complicated problem that has been solved in D3.
It's a mathematically complicated problem to solve, so I don't think it has anything to do with any kind of framework or library that people are going to be using. So
yeah, but that said, in my experience, my information might be out of date, but I seem to recall that. So Vue, if you want to use something that isn't Vue, you can just use it and be like, okay, Vue, back off. I'm going to use something else. It's going to modify the DOM for me. Whereas I think in the past, when I tried this for React, React does not like it if something else updates the DOM.
It's my right to update the DOM. You can't do that.
Exactly. But again, that could be completely out of date. That could have changed by now.
Cool. Well, let's give our attendees just a few more seconds. Just make sure we don't have any more questions. Well, but Callum, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to prepare this for us. It was a very nice presentation. We hope to have you here again in the future. And yeah, it was very nice. Okay.
I just posted my slides in the YouTube comments. I tweeted them out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have a URL to show or anything, but I just wanted to remind everybody that all of those meetups that we have been doing virtually are going to be available on YouTube as well in our channels, both for Vue.js and Frontend Love. So if you guys want to check it out later. So, okay. Well, thank you very much, Callum.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate you all being here. And please don't miss the next one. We are preparing some very good content for you.